All right, how's everybody doing? Good? All right, I feel like a lot of the questions that I was hearing from the background were already taking some of the juice out of my presentation here, but we're going to try our best. But thanks everybody for having me. Like Brian said, I'm Bryant Black from the Greater Houston Partnership. We are the Regional Chamber of Commerce and Economic Engine for the 13-county region surrounding Houston. You're talking roughly 7.8 million people, I would say, encompassing that region. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing in that region that's been talked about by some of the employer partners today, but I'm going to go into a little bit more of an effort that we've been working on over the last 2 years or so to hopefully get ahead of some of the issues surrounding workforce that could that could come up as these hydrogen jobs develop, and in particular how we can make sure that all the communities in the Houston region can share in that prosperity and benefit to make sure that disadvantaged communities are also part of this growth as it continues, both in the energy industry and more specifically in the hydrogen industry. So as you'll see here, I got a couple of fun quotes from some of our stakeholders, one being Bobby Tudor, who kind of leads some of our energy transition work, and then obviously I think y'all know who Bill Gates is. But I'm going to start off just going a little bit back a couple years. We've been working on this for quite a while now, and it's all focused on jobs, everything about jobs, what good jobs can do for those in disadvantaged communities, not only because it's required by the Department of Energy, but because it makes sense economically for the region and for these projects. So what we've done here is we started with the first 1, 2, and 3 of this exec summary you're going to see are how we really decided to approach this, which was what can we do if we take a look at all the jobs that drive the hydrogen economy and identify the ones that are truly attainable for those folks in these communities. And then on the second point, you will see how we can, or a third point, I'm sorry, but that's the second point. The third point you will see, looking back into the disadvantaged communities, underserved communities, however you want to define them. Disadvantaged is probably not the right term, but it's the term the federal government's using. What roles and personas that are currently existing in those communities could possibly have some alignment and some transferability into the jobs that are going to drive the hydrogen economy. And that's how we thought there might be a way to address some of these workforce issues moving forward so that there is some attainability and some transferability and crosswalking so that the jobs of tomorrow can be, hopefully, to some questions I heard earlier about curriculum development and pathways can be addressed today. So we're bringing together our employer partners, our educational institutions, and our nonprofit, as well as government entities to bring them to the table and coalesce around what some of these curriculum and pathways might look like to address these jobs of tomorrow, and then build out roadmaps and journeys into those jobs. So I'm sure there's been a little bit talked about this and just the size of the opportunity, the capital influx from not only our employer partners, but these DOE projects, including the hub. Right now, 1/3 of the hydrogen production in the country is right there in our backyard. And we have the infrastructure and industrial advantages to make sure that that is the place where this growth can continue to happen. We do also, but all that said, we have some structural advantages, but we also have some human capital shortfalls that we need to take care of. You're looking at 30% of our workforce is middle skilled. That's roughly a million, right around 1 million people. And in order to get them into those jobs, you need to continue to grow their skill sets and make sure they're not being stagnant in what their capabilities in these opportunities. About a little under 900,000 of those are underqualified for those jobs now. But we do anticipate, roughly estimate, and there's different forecasts on this, but 180,000 net new jobs over the next 10 years. So this slide I find really important. This kind of shows the difference between educational attainment in our disadvantaged communities as defined by the Department of Energy and the federal government compared to that of the Greater Houston region as a whole. And what you'll find is that close to 85% of those in those communities don't have a bachelor's degree, basically, or more. And so that's kind of gives you an idea of the stark contrast between the general population and those in those communities. A little bit more about I'm sure y'all talked about this, but the the size of the hub and what the workforce demands are going to require to make this happen. So here's an idea of some of the partners that we brought to the table. Some are probably in the room, but like I said, it cuts across industry, nonprofit, and educational institutions. A lot of work with our HIS, our independent school districts, our community colleges, our nonprofit partners who I know are in the room, and then some of the companies that are going to be driving this work. So I talked a little bit about how we prioritize those jobs, those pinpointed jobs. And what you're going to see here is that there's a Venn diagram where demand for jobs, career growth and security and accessibility had to be required to meet the requirements to be one of the 10 jobs that we identified. But eventually we honed in on 10 specific jobs and roles in the hydrogen industry that we think are going to be imperative to make this work. But it's not, one of the key findings is it's not just hydrogen jobs, it's jobs that exist today. It's welding, it's I&E tech, it's compliance officers, it's health and safety officers, and those rose to the top because of the demand for them, the accessibility, and the opportunity going forward. And on the supply side, when you're talking about the opportunities that currently exist in disadvantaged communities, we wanted to take a look at jobs that had skills transferability to a hydrogen opportunity, how we could mass target those in those communities, and what would be the incentive and impact. So we didn't want to say, hey, you're in a job in a disadvantaged community right now or in your community now. We want you to take that same job in a different industry. We want it to be something where it's not only transferable, but also impactful to you and your family. So we did that through a matching exercise where you can look at, if you see that chart in the middle, it's basically taking the hydrogen jobs going across and the disadvantaged community opportunities going down and giving it a score and seeing what rose to the top. And from that, we were able to identify exactly who and where in those communities we think there's going to be good opportunity going forward. For those of you who aren't from Houston, Houston's a big place. This was an exercise in taking a lot of information and kind of distilling it down to be something that could be hopefully actionable, so you're not trying to boil the ocean, right? And the roles that we started off with was from this larger swath of hydrogen jobs across the entire value chain before we got down to those final 10. So I mentioned Houston being big. Here's a little bit about exactly how big it is and just the opportunity within those disadvantaged community. You're looking at 1.2 million people that are considered within those populations right now. So it's a large pool that you could potentially be pulling from if an employer partner or a group of employer partners are willing to resource or pool their resources and go at this from a curriculum development and a program or system standpoint to try to figure out ways to tackle this. Just a little bit about what exactly those DACs as defined by the government means. We're looking at twice the federal poverty line. And this kind of breaks it down exactly what we're looking at here per how many people are in your household, all the way from 29,000 up to, if you're an 8-person household, 100,000 annual income. Sorry, there's a lot of slides. And a lot of data. I'm trying to get through it. So and then we also did an exercise not just with jobs in disadvantaged communities, but also how could we group them? And we saw that these 11 occupational groups rose up that could probably be utilized to really dive into. And those go from construction and extraction all the way to those that are working in the education space as the ones that were most relevant to hydrogen jobs. That was all part of, like I mentioned, the skills matching exercise. So what can we do to make this stuff accessible? Not just theoretical, but accessible. And as we've begun touring this around into these communities, that's something that we've really had to be cognizant about and thoughtful about, is not making sure we're not selling somebody on something that doesn't exist in the long term. And so we're really kind of iterating what that's going to look like to make sure that we're not just thinking about the jobs of today, but the jobs that are going to be here in the long term and how we can make sure that that timeline works properly for everybody. So here's a little bit more about the DACs and what some of those barriers are. You're looking at 44% have financial barriers, 47% transportation, 26% lack of education, 83% childcare. So I know a lot of people this probably resonates with, whether or not you're from a defined DAC or not. And I think that's something we heard a lot, not just from the data, but from talking to those in the community. And we've also worked on the right side to identify not just what the solutions could look like, but who some of those partners might be going forward in the Houston community. And here's some of the things that we decided we think going forward could help with that engagement in those communities, whether it be job fair, different ways that we could really engage. A lot of times communities are disadvantaged because they don't have those resources. So you either pull from outside those communities or identify those leaders and stakeholders in those regions, including educational institutions at the K through 12 and post-secondary level that are already doing some of this work to figure out how they can hopefully do it better. This is a little bit more about the hydrogen projects that are coming and what that capital investment will look like. You'll see, if you're familiar with the geography of Houston, or this is actually about where the disadvantaged communities are, and if it's a red dot, that's where there's already been a FID on a hydrogen investment, and then the orange dots are where there's oil refineries, yellow means industrial gas facilities, and brown are chemical facilities. So you'll see that there's quite a bit of overlap between the populations that could potentially benefit from these roles and where those projects are going to be happening. And this is actually showing where not only are there those projects, but where are the educational institutions that we can work with and are working with to build out new curriculum or build on current curriculum to lead to hydrogen jobs. And a lot of what we found over this time is that the curriculum's I'm not going to say it's finished, but a lot of it is 80-20 or 85-15, where most of it's already being done for our legacy energy industry, and we have to go that final mile with our employer partners to specify it to those those specifications of our employer partners so that they feel that they're getting the people they need for these jobs. So that was all around pilot one. That was 22, 23, and then over the last year, we've been working on the second phase of the pilot, which was, all right, we've got our 10 jobs that we think are going to be critical. What if we go deeper on a single occupation that we think is not only one of these 10, but might be one of the most critical going forward? And so we identified electricians by interviewing some of our employer partners. And so we've worked with these, you see the education, employer, and nonprofit stakeholders here identified, who we've been working on a pilot program. I think somebody mentioned John Cockrell as a partner earlier, and they're building this electrolyzer plant to support what's going on in Baytown. And so we are building out a current curriculum for electrician to help meet their needs, as they're new to the Houston region. They don't have those traditional relationships like so many of our employer partners do. So they said, we're willing to work on a pilot to try to make this work. So we have these folks that are ready to go as these plants come online. And so we just finished that phase of the work, and we're starting up this next phase. But I'll show you some more fun maps first, which this is actually, the yellow is what we did was we mapped over, not just the last one was around capital projects and actual colleges and high schools, but this is showing actual electrical programs for our community college and high school partners. And where the yellow means there's a noticeable gap between where there's going to be a capital project and where there's an electrical program leading directly into those jobs. So I'm big into geography, and I think all these geospatial tools can really show us, not just because of the size of Houston, not just where the jobs are, but where the people who can really get into them are, because transportation can be a huge barrier. So there's a lot there, I know, but the main takeaway is in the southeast, and that where you see the yellow, that's going to be a big opportunity for colleges and high schools that we work with to build out new curriculum and stand up new programs, both at the CTE level and at the college level, to serve our employer partners if there's willingness to come to the table. And this is just another representation showing that same thing, but not just where there's programs, but where there's specific coursework offered. And now this one is finally getting into showing a little bit more about just at the college level compared to where the FID facilities are. And so as part of that work in the electrical space, we also did a deep dive with our partners at NCCER, who are the accreditation for the most industry recognized accreditation for electricians in the region, to figure out not just what the coursework could look like, but who at those programs are offering that specific coursework that would be beneficial to our hydrogen partners. And so this is all part of a playbook that we created going forward to offer to our employer partners if they're looking to try to stand up some of these curriculum pathways for their workforce. So this kind of gives you an overview from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We did the roles matching. We went into some of that specific work with John Cockrell and then did a pilot program and have built a playbook that we are open to sharing with not only our education partners and employer partners, but now we're about to start a new phase of the work that's going to go deeper, hopefully, and wider with pilot around electrician, and then hopefully we were talking this morning with a company we're going to try to see what we can do to solve some of the instructor issues, because one of the things that kept coming up in the work is that high school programs and colleges are willing to stand up new programs and employer partnerships, but a lot of times they can't find instructors to do it. So we're trying to also address that issue. We've also built some things out that we think people can learn from around just organizational design across when you're trying to build out a multi-organizational go-forward strategy, which can be complex. We're dealing with 80-ish stakeholder groups here. So what does that look like to actually manage something of that size going forward? And then I mentioned the playbook. We wanted a playbook that could be usable and resourceful. So we not only built it, but we made a decision tree within the playbook to say whether or not you're looking to do just governance or solution development or curriculum development or talent pipeline or one or multiple of the above, you can kind of deep dive into any of those at any time to figure out what makes sense for your organization. And another thing that's going to be part of this next phase of the work is obviously we have the solutions road mapping and the talent and community engagement, which is going to be the big one. But we're also developing this portal where you can not only look at some of those mapping tools, but also track the jobs in this hydrogen space over time to see if we are moving the needle for these specific jobs and roles that we think are going to be critical to the hydrogen industry going forward. Here's a little bit better view of it. It's still illustrative. The team's working on it at the moment, but the mapping tools are there, and I think the important thing is we know that we can't solve the entire issue, the problem for the 13-county region all at once, but the hypothesis is that if we get hyper-focused on where there's cross-sections of education and employment in these areas for these disadvantaged communities where the hydrogen jobs are, we think we can move the needle in that way. Some of the key takeaways, I think the main thing that we've learned, obviously data matters, but connections with people and relationships are critical too. That's really floating to the top. I don't think we're telling you anything new, but I do believe it matters to keep that in mind as we, especially cutting across multiple organizations of this size, who do care about how they can get into these communities in Houston, but in the end, it still matters that you create those relationships and foster them along. So I mentioned the playbook a little bit, but this is kind of the 5-step process that we took to get there. So identify those roles, determine skilling needs, devise a learning journey, map those current state jobs and programs, and then co-create solutions. And that's really where we are at this space. Every day we're having communication with our employer stakeholders to figure out what it takes to not just have them at the table, but to identify meaningful solutions for them. Because everyone's different. Every employer has a different issue. Everyone's going to have a different shortfall of jobs in this space, but we want to make sure we're bringing the right stakeholders to the table to hopefully address that. This is kind of what I thought would be a good slide to finish up on. It's a lot, but it's really the whole deck in one slide. It shows we're matching supply with demand for the talent pipeline, and then underlying that is kind of a baseline is all the support services, both on the employer and on the workforce side, that can really make sure that can all happen, because that's why people in these communities fall out of these jobs, is if you don't have those at the table who can keep them in there, that it's going to continue to happen. So we wanted to make sure that we visualize this, and then just, just thinking of all your different stakeholder groups. I haven't even really talked about unions, which I know was, hinted at a little bit earlier, but we do need to make sure. And I think you're going to hear some more about that later. But there's a lot of different stakeholder groups at the table that all have their own priorities, all have their own mandates So it's important if you're building these coalitions, it's always important to keep in mind that you have to align, resources and align, kind of what people's goals and metrics are. So that's what I had. If you ever have any questions about anything around this project or where we need to go from here, just please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm Melitza, and I'm leading one organization that provides resources to the community for those who want to find a job in tech. Have you considered to hire those who are pretty talented and they have been laid off lately?
Yeah, so there's actually somebody backstage who's probably more well-equipped to address that question. But yes, we're working with the Workforce Solutions, the Gulf Coast Workforce Board, to think about those who are coming in and out of the workforce. But we need to be better thinking about those with disqualifying things that might traditionally be disqualifying from a candidate, such as justice involvement. Just one of my big chips on my shoulder is around companies overqualifying a job or making, where bachelor's requirements aren't required or graduate degree requirements where they're not required. What can we do to help companies think about, there are a lot of jobs that need certain levels of education, but where can we maybe bring some of those thresholds back? And I think that's kind of what you're hinting at, is there are a lot of people who can get into some of these occupations that we're not really allowing for right now, that I think we can do better about going forward.
Yeah, two questions. To what extent is the hub money driving the concern for the disadvantaged communities? And number two, what main messages are you getting back from the 12 public interactions that you've held so far?
Well, I think we could acknowledge that the hub mandates are driving some of that conversation without saying that we don't need to be too cynical about it, and saying that doesn't mean that it isn't a conversation we should continue to have. And hopefully it's a little bit of a carrot, less of a stick, that we need to have those conversations and see why things have gotten the way they are in certain parts of our region. And that's why they put them in place. Hopefully it makes some of those but right now there's a lot of hard conversations being had around behavior changes to get there, whether it be for a company or for a college or for just a community in general. But yeah, I don't think it's insignificant that they put those things in place, for sure. I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Are there any major lessons coming back from the 12 public meetings that you've had with interested groups? Yeah,
I think one of the main ones is not only relationships matter, but language matters. We went in and said we referred to them as disadvantaged communities. I don't think that's the right language to use, but it's federally mandated. But so we have to be really conscientious and smart and work with our partners to figure out how to talk like humans, I guess. So that's one of the big ones for me. And then just like I said, geography matters. There are people who do it, but not everybody can drive from Cypress to Baytown or the Woodlands to Brazoria County. It's a big place. Texas is big. Houston's big too. We have to be thoughtful about. That's why I think these mapping tools are going to be critical. Is we have to be thoughtful about identifying how people can get to these jobs, not just identifying the jobs.
Thanks, Bryant. Just everything that involving energy transition is a massive undertaking. I mean, this is the job that you've got in the Houston area to try to mobilize a workforce to meet these needs is incredible. What's been the reception at the high schools, the community colleges to your outreach? I mean, I've got to think they're they're faced with their own set of problems and issues that they're focused on. So how are you able to get their attention, and then what do you have to do to really mobilize the effort into those institutions to get these programs started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they're ready. They want to be at the table. K through 12 obviously is dealing with all of their own funding issues at the moment, pretty much across the state, and I know a lot of the big districts in Houston are. They want to be at the table. They still want, even though we have some really good partners who are good at facilitating those relationships, and the main thing is to get the career and technical education programs right. Like I said, a lot of the curriculum and the programs are already developed. We have to get that last final piece that is hydrogen specific and make sure that it gets obviously state approval. And we have those relationships in place too. But they want to come to the table. The K through 12 folks are saying, when do we get started, basically? And then at the college level, same thing. They're the new House Bill 8. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the new funding mechanisms at the community college level, but they're it's basically outcomes focused, where you have to get a job to get funding back into your program. And I think that, if anything, that's incentivizing them even more to participate. And they know our stakeholders at Lee College and San Jacinto College and Houston Community College and Lone Star and the like they know how important this industry is to the region, and if we don't get this right, what it means. So they're ready to come to the table for sure.
So I had a quick question. This is regarding curriculum development, right, for the hydrogen economy in particular. So do you see a need for a shift in change in which how we educate engineers to be ready for this workforce? And what I mean by that is currently this seems to be at a very interesting intersection between material science, chemical engineers, and electrochemistry. And so is this a conversation that needs to be had? And do you see that pull coming from the market, or is this something that professors have to just sit in a room and dream up?
I would probably be speaking above my pay grade to talk about revolutionizing the engineering landscape, but I do think, I'm sure there is an appetite for that. I know two-year colleges want to have a pathway into a four-year engineering degree and are building those out. But in terms of core curriculum for engineers, I couldn't speak to that.
How are companies incentivizing students to go to these junior colleges and community colleges to get educated with the programs that they need?
Those who are currently employed?
The students, just how are companies supporting the community colleges to bring in students that are interested in these careers?
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're working through right now, is trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think somebody was talking to some of the legislation that's still being worked through at the moment. Apprenticeships and on-the-job training and work-based learning has got to be a big part of it. And companies they're willing to do this, but I do think there are certain jobs and occupations and roles that are just, we have to be able to recognize that some companies aren't willing to budge on those. And so what can we do in the ones that they are willing to have a conversation about? All right. Yeah. Thank y'all.